Hello, and welcome to another episode of Thoroughly Thriving, where we're putting human back in human capital solutions. On today's episode, we're going to hear from an industry leader where they're sharing their thoughts, feedback, and perspective on what's happening in today's world of work. Well, let's stay tuned and perk our ears up for another exciting episode.
Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Thoroughly Thriving. You are in for a treat today. We are really excited to have today's guest join us. Darren, man, I'm telling you, 2026 is flying by. I cannot believe we are just like week after week continuing to build, but we have had some of the most incredible guests on over the last few months, and this guest today is no exception to that. Really excited to have Tara Hun-Dorris join us today. Tara is a seasoned biotech leader with a deep experience in medical writing and regulatory strategy, clinical development communications. Over the course of her career, she's actually supported multiple development programs across biotech and pharma and really helps the teams to translate the complex science into clear, regulatory-ready narratives that move therapies forward. She currently serves as a senior director of medical writing at Lexeo Therapeutics, where she partners closely with the clinical, regulatory, and translational teams to support drug development, submissions, and everything in between. But, beyond her leadership experience, she's also been deeply involved in the medical writing community as a whole, contributing to the different scientific dialogue and industry education. She's got publications and service within the AMWA, the American Medical Writers Association. And today we're going to talk about this evolving role of medical writing in biotech. It's such a linchpin of so much that gets done and such a key part of the group. And so we want to talk about how great teams can turn complex data into really impactful stories, what it really takes to thrive in today's fast-moving drug development environment. So, Tara, welcome to Thoroughly Thriving. We're excited to have you.
I'm thrilled to be here. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, we're excited. Definitely appreciated the opportunity to connect and learn more about your background prior to filming this. But just to kick things off for our listeners, for our devoted, thoroughly thriving fans, it's such an interesting story to learn how someone got into the industry. What their why was, or even discovering their why after they've gotten in. Um, but how did you get into medical writing, and what drew you to this field, specifically within life sciences?
That's a great question. And when I was thinking about the conversation we were going to have today, and the context of the whole conversation, there's a lot of talk around AI in our industry. So I asked AI what my background was. And it told me that I was a frustrated bench scientist who got bored and became a medical writer. That is fiction. Never been a bench scientist, but I thought it was fascinating that that's what it spit out for me. So I started out going to college. My parents begged me to be a veterinarian because I loved animals, and I don't really think loving animals is really the thing that would make one a good veterinarian, because there's a lot of suffering in there. But I just didn't want the routine of like a clinic vet, and I didn't know a lot about zoo vets. This was back before the internet, a long time ago. It was harder to research things. I was very passionate about science. So I knew I wanted to do something around science, but I also recognized that, math wasn't my strongest suit. Like, I had some limitations. It was going to be really hard for me to say pass a biochemistry class, probably, right? So I decided I was going to become a quote unquote science writer. And I had this vague dream in the back of my mind to be the editor of National Geographic magazine, very humble stuff, right? And we were an Army family. I was an Army brat. We moved all over the country and lived overseas briefly. And toward the end of my high school, my family moved back to my mom's home of West Virginia, and they dropped me in the suburbs of Charleston, West Virginia. And I was already really interested in environmental issues. And I became extremely interested in the coal-related pollution, mountaintop removal mining, all the things that were still really big back at that time. So that's kind of what I was interested in. And I decided that I would major in journalism and minor in political science and some sort of biology, and that would set me on the pathway to future prestigious magazine editor. I don't know. So as one does in West Virginia, I approached my uncle Davy, who was, rest his soul, a wonderful man, but he was the recently retired head of the Office of Water Resources for the state of West Virginia. And I told him about my dreams and ambitions. So the next thing I knew, I had a 40-hour-a-week paid internship with the state of West Virginia, working in their Office of Water Resources. And I got to work in communications. We produced a newsletter. It was myself, their full-time staff, and another lovely intern from the University of Kentucky. Not sure if she was there from nepotism or actual talent, but the three of us got along fabulously. And it was just kind of like that one little thing was that foot in the door, right? That's how it starts. So from then on, experience built upon experience. And I just pursued this career to be an environmental writer. I thought that's what I was going to do. And I earned my bachelor's degree in journalism with the minors I mentioned from West Virginia University. And I froze my butt off. So I went down to South Carolina for grad school to kind of get away from the cold. And I was still studying mass communications. And when I graduated, I went to work for a large wastewater trade organization in the Washington, D.C. area. And it sounds silly and boring, but it's actually fascinating. I mean, everything about our public health and the world we live in, a lot of it does come down to sewage and what we do with it, right? How clean is your water? How healthy is your society, right? So it was a pretty cool experience, and they had multiple magazines and newsletters. So I was producing 20,000 to 40,000 words a copy a month. It was a really intense job, and I got a lot of great experience. But I had made a huge mistake in grad school, huge. I had fallen in love with this redheaded boy from South Carolina. And he moved up to DC with me, and he referred to it as the frozen north. And he could not stand to be there. So he wanted to return to the Carolinas. So he found a job in Raleigh, North Carolina, which I had never really thought much about. I knew UNC was in this area, that sort of thing, but I just thought it was an area you went through on the way to the beach, right? So here we are in Raleigh. You know, there's no National Geographic headquarters in Raleigh. There's no Washington Post in Raleigh. There's no thing for me to aspire to. And the company that I worked for had actually offered me work from home, but I thought, well, then I'll be stuck in this apartment and I'll never meet anybody. So I didn't take it. So I ended up going to work for a couple trade associations, like locally, like nonprofits. Like one was an environmental nonprofit and one was related to education. And I was miserable. I mean, just miserable. So while I had been in grad school, I had done an internship in New York City for a medical publication called U.S. Pharmacist. So I called my editor up there and I'm like, I am so miserable. I'm in North Carolina. I'm newly married. Like, this all sucks. And he's like, Tara, you're in RTP. Go be a medical writer. And I thought, I don't know what that is. But I went on monster.com because that's how old I am. And I Googled medical writer. And I saw some jobs. So I said, okay. So I applied for one at something called a CRO. And I could not for the life of me figure out what CRO stood for. But I went in and I interviewed for this job and I talked my way into this job. And then I found myself sitting in an office with another person with this is old school, like binder of TLF outputs for a CSR. Like, and I didn't know what they were. I didn't know anything. But I learned, and I worked with a great group of people. They were really kind. The really cool thing about CRO world is you get to experience a lot of different things, right? So I got a lot of experience very quickly. And I also quickly realized that CRO world was not for me, but medical writing was. So I did that for 3 years, and then I became a contract writer. And I did that for about a decade and a half while my children were young. So that's kind of how I ended up where I am, completely by accident.
It's funny. It's all too common a story for many of us that we head one direction and then something in life causes our directions to change and we end up falling right into where we're actually supposed to be. And we had no idea that circumstances would just align us into those things. It's funny how that works out sometimes.
Sometimes we just get lucky. I every once in a while I do have a little sentimental thought about being, writing about the environment again. But I did a little bit of that when I was freelancing, and it just the pay ratio just it wasn't. I couldn't make it work logically. But yeah,
Totally understand. Well, hey, so you've been in medical writing for a while. You started on the CRO side, went independent, and then now you've been working for sponsor companies for almost the last 10 years or so in a variety of different roles. So you've seen all types of medical writers. You've seen the good, the bad, the experienced, the new. What are maybe just a couple core skills that you have seen over your career that really distinguish an excellent medical writer from just a good medical writer?
yeah, and I think this is something that's becoming more important as technology changes and as the field evolves. And I think that my thinking on this has also changed over time, as our industry has changed. When I first started out, in my mind, a really competent, what I would call technical writer who is completely focused on accuracy and consistency above all else, template adherence. That sort of a person could have a very long and successful career, with protocols, life cycle management documents, that sort of thing. Um, I think there was a lot of opportunity like that in CRO world and big pharma. And with the evolution of technology and even just things like the way we can transmit files and share information getting faster and better, and the ability to develop macros, and we can purchase CTV, templates that are updated by vendors or service providers regularly. You know, all these really technical skills are still wonderful, but I don't think they're what's gonna cut it anymore necessarily. Um, I think that it's really going to come down to a lot more of what I will call the softer skills, and I hate to say that, but because it's probably true in almost every single job you can think of, right? I mean, what really matters? What kind of a person are you? How reliable are you? How dedicated to your job are you? How dedicated are you to learning and growing? How invested are you in the people around you and the place and the corporate objectives and the departmental objectives and your personal objectives? And does the role you're in align with all of that? So I think it really, you have to be a good writer. You have to be smart. You have to be able to understand complex subject matter. But most importantly, you have to be able to work with people. If you want to work, particularly if you want to work on complex documents, you know, intense submissions on like an IND or a BLA or a briefing document where you have a whole team working together, you have to kind of be a facilitator. We always say herder of cats. It's overused, but you have to really have the people skills to bring sometimes people who don't always agree with each other together under intense deadline pressure to get things done. And you still have to be a good writer, and they're still going to yell at you if you miss a comma or a period. So
Yeah, that's right. Tara, you talked about how the role and how the function of medical writing you referenced a little bit earlier. There's been an evolution, and I think that's been even more prominent over the last several years. Um, but in your view, in your opinion and perspective, how has the role of medical writing truly evolved over the last, not even decade, I would say the last 3 years in drug development? And, we've seen advancements and authoring tools to AI and anything in between. But Yeah, kind of in a condensed answer, what would you say has been the biggest impact that you've seen over the last 3 years?
Until about a year ago, I would have said the biggest impact in my world of medical writing would be, this push for AI and this pressure toward using AI. And I don't mean pressure in a negative way. I just mean that it's like it's a balance because it's another thing that you have to learn and do and grow on top of your day to day. And sometimes it's hard to fit all the things in. It's not necessarily a negative, right? But in the last year, in the regulatory space, I would say that the unpredictability of the FDA has been the biggest surprise and change and thing that has evolved. And there was an article last week in the New York Times. I don't know if y'all had a chance to read it. It's particularly affected the rare disease space. And that's where a lot of drug development is, because we've been so fortunate that we found treatments for so many diseases. We're now targeting often very small populations that, if you try to run a conventional clinical trial, you might not even have the number of patients you need total that you would need for a conventional clinical trial. So there's, there's been a lot of, collaboration with the agency and the industry, but not just them, also the patient populations and the advocates and the families. And there's been like this triangle of, collaboration and, there have just been some changes recently to, how things are done.
It does make it difficult in an industry that's already challenged for time, resources, and everything else to then now also have to aim at a moving target. Definitely makes things a little bit more complicated than they already are. And I think the challenge of a medical writer, I've had some great mentors in my career who have really been deeply involved in medical writing, who have taught me a lot about the nuance and the difficulty and the challenge already. But to your point, in adding that as well, man, that definitely makes things a little bit more challenging, right?
It does. And you have to be able to, in this field, pivot on a dime. And you have to be able to just let stuff go, set it aside, never truly get rid of it because things come full circle. And you have to really be able to pivot your focus, and you have to be able to tell what's a real crisis, what's a real deadline versus what is somebody panicking about and it's not really a real deadline or a real crisis. And you have to manage people in those situations as well. Even if you're not, say, the leader of your team, or you're a member of a team, or you're a member of management, or you're even a new writer, in the sense where you're bringing people together over a document, you always need leadership skills. Like, it doesn't matter where you are in your career. So, and that's part of that is identifying what needs to be done and why, and what doesn't need to be done.
It's funny you bring that up. The next question I had kind of queued up in my head was talking about leadership as a medical writing really required skill. I think people think of medical writers as just being able to take and condense information, but so much of medical writing requires a lot of deep collaboration with other teams cross-functionally, and even sometimes across a variety of different organizations where you're trying to collect information. And so how do you recommend, or how do you personally build and navigate those relationships most effectively? Because I think if I asked most medical writers, I would say that the work itself they're pretty good at, but being able to navigate those relationships and being able to navigate the collaboration can often be where they get tripped up the most.
Yeah, and my number one rule, and I apologize if I'm not allowed to say this, is like, don't be an asshole, right? Like, you never know what somebody is dealing with, or what's going on in their professional life, let alone their personal life. So as I've gotten older, I feel like maybe I'm trying to get better at this. But I really tried to move the perception, at least in my world, away from this idea of the medical writer as a scribe in the basement. Because if you are and there are days where I will sit by myself and write and edit and be happy as a clam. But if you are in isolation, you don't know what's changing and evolving, and if you don't understand the thinking behind what's going on, it's very hard to tell a story, and it's very hard to identify what the different parties are bringing to the table that is most important, and all of that, and what is critical and what isn't. So it really does start with relationships, and everybody does not have to be your best friend. I am far from everybody's cup of tea. I am often a cranky introvert, but I do, even though I work from home in North Carolina, I do make time to go to whichever company I'm at, into the office, and I spend time with people, and I learn about them and they learn about me. And sometimes I will vary how I work with one person versus another individually to get a better result and to put them more at ease, because some different people have different anxiety points, right? So if you can identify the things that are going to put that person more at ease, or a way of working that that person understands, then you can do something else with someone else, often if you're putting sections of a document together. And, at the end, when everybody's just trying to get a document approved, that can get intense, but sometimes decisions are just made hierarchically. And I always tell people, know what hill you want to die on and what hill you don't want to die on, right? If it's scientifically sound, if the messaging is appropriate, if it's something you can stand behind as a scientist or a writer, then set it free if it's time. Um, because nobody's ever 100% right. And I could look at a document 1,000 times in 1,000 years, and I would make changes every time. It's always,
Yeah.
your idea of what is perfect is always going to change.
Very true. Tara, such good wisdom and perspective. It is. And look, I appreciate the candor because you're exactly right,
Yeah.
and to bring my wife into this, who's in clinical operations,
And bless her heart, because ClinOps is the hardest part of what we do, I think. Really and truly. It's a lot of juggling.
yeah, that's right. Tara, what common pitfalls do you see in reg submissions um, that strong medical writing could have prevented?
I see a lot of sloppiness where things are rushed. Um, I have seen actual mistakes, and I think sometimes the actual mistakes, maybe it wasn't so much on the like having a good medical writer would have prevented it, in that the good medical writer would have ensured a proper quality control process was in place, right? And because when we're all looking at the same thing for weeks at a time, and we think the p-value is 0.005, and somebody left out a zero, we're going to see what we think is there. But you bring in a fresh set of eyes, and they're going to catch that for you, right? That's that's the reality. So I think that is something good medical writers can bring to the table. A really good medical writer, if you can project how did he say it? One of my former chief medical officers said, I came into a tense meeting like I had just taken a Quaalude, which I don't take drugs, for the record. But I would just try to calm everybody down, because if you're all tense, the work has to be done. If you're all relaxed, the work has to be done. Like, let's just, let's take a deep breath, and let's look at what we have to do, and let's identify the steps to do it. And then we do the best we can, you know? And so I think that bringing in someone who can really focus on what's important, why it's important, what conversations need to be had, what conversations really don't need to be had, who needs to be in the room, who doesn't. It's a lot, again, it's the herding of the cats. It's relationships, herding of the cats. And if you can tell a story, if you're actually a good writer, I think that's like the cherry on the top of the sundae.
So good. I couldn't agree with you more, right? Be able to accurately communicate the narrative and tell a story, but then also, to use a sports analogy, not gripping the bat so tight, right? And allowing others in, right? Because it's sometimes hard to see the forest through the trees. I know it is for me at times, right? And that's why I have a good partner like Sean to shine a light on some blind spots that those that are close to me know that I have, right? So I've found that the best environments, the best atmosphere, Tara, is one that people operate in a open-minded, kind of willing, collaborative dynamic, and you used the word soft skills a little bit earlier. And I've shared this in former podcast episodes that we get to record. You know, I don't feel there's anything soft about them. I think they're power skills. When you're able to connect, collaborate, and work towards one goal in a uniform fashion, that takes a lot of power, sometimes to relinquish and let people in. So
I was going to add one more thing, like, because I think, and maybe it's just me, but I think a lot of times writers will feel sort of a sense of maybe imposter syndrome because you're in this room with all of these brilliant, accomplished people. Some of them have discovered the very, medicines you're trying to get approved. Like, it can be a bit overwhelming. And I remember, I'm just going through all my like former chief medical officers today. Another one had said to me, we are all important. Like, if we brought you into this company, this is a small company, you have your role and you are valued for what you do and what you think. Now, it doesn't mean they care what I think about the Super Bowl winner or the next product coming to market, but they care what I think in the area of my subject matter expertise. And so to remember to not be a bully, but to have that confidence and to know that you are supposed to be there and you have a role to play, I think really helps people get their heads straight with that.
That's phenomenal. We subscribe to that philosophy here at Thorough Group, and I'm going to touch upon that here in about 30 seconds. Tara, we have thoroughly enjoyed this episode. We have. It's been insightful, informative, and I'll say this, I really appreciate your candor.
Oh, well, thank you. I hope I don't get in trouble. And obviously, everything I said is my opinion. It has nothing to do with any employers, past or present, or future.
There you go. Got to throw out the disclaimer. We get it. No, this has been great. And look, we're going to put show notes in the episode too, so all of our listeners can go back and check that out. But you talked about playing your part within the company, and we're grateful that we get to work with so many sponsor-based companies across the U.S. and support them with a variety of solutions. But here at Thorough Group, we're really only able to do that by working as one and winning as one. And that's been the philosophy that we approach with any solutions or services that we do provide, because we're so passionate about advancing global health. And so as we close this episode, we want to thank Tara again for joining from North Carolina and sharing her experiences, perspectives, and wisdom. And we're looking forward to seeing everyone on our next episode of Thoroughly Thriving.
Thank you, guys. This was so much fun.
Take care.
Thank you for joining us today for another great episode of Thoroughly Thriving. If you enjoyed today's episode, please feel free to share it with those in your world. If you'd like to learn more about the Thorough Group, please go to thoroughgroup.com. And remember that we will all remain thoroughly thriving if we continue to work as one and win as one.